At 18, Mara Quinn was given 2 trash bags, a bus ticket, and a goodbye that took less than a minute. She had $43, a flashlight her foster father had left her before he died, and nowhere in the world to go. For a few nights, she slept on a folded coat in the back of an all-night laundromat. Then she remembered something Walt had told her years before, about an old service tunnel beneath the city that had been sealed since the year he started working the line. She found the hatch. She climbed down 40 feet of rusted ladder, and what she built inside that abandoned subway tunnel was something the city had spent 50 years trying to erase. The morning she aged out, the office smelled like old paper and bad coffee. The caseworker, a woman in a beige sweater whose name Mara already could not remember, slid a folder across the desk and asked her to sign 3 forms. Mara signed. The pen was warm from someone else's hand. The folder held her birth certificate, 2 pages of school transcripts, a vaccination record, and a single yellowed photograph she did not recognize. "That's everything we have on file," the caseworker said. "I'm sorry it isn't more." "It's fine," Mara said. It wasn't, but she had learned by 16 that the word fine was a door you closed quickly behind you. Down at the curb, the bus station shuttle was idling. The caseworker walked her out carrying one of the trash bags. The other Mara carried herself. Inside the bags were 3 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, a hairbrush, a Bible she had never opened, and her one good pair of boots. Tucked between the layers, wrapped in a sock, was a small steel flashlight with a black grip and the initials WQ scratched into the base. Everything else Walt had left her had gone somewhere into the agency's storage. The boxes of tools, the manuals, the small radio that had sat by his bed in the hospice room, all of it locked behind a chain-link gate where nobody would ever ask for it. "You'll be all right, Mara," the caseworker said. She didn't quite meet Mara's eyes. "There's a list of shelters in the bag. You call if you need anything." Mara nodded. The caseworker shook her hand. The shuttle pulled away from the curb. By the time the bus station came into view through the smeared window, Mara had already stopped looking back. Walt Quinn had not been her father technically. He had been a foster, the 4th one, and the only one she could imagine having been her father if the world had been a slightly different shape. He had taken her in when she was 16, after a placement in a row house on the west side fell apart for reasons no one explained to her. Walt was a widower in his early 60s, an electrician with the City Transit Authority for 41 years, and he had agreed to one teenage girl because his wife, before she died, had said, "Promise me you'll keep being useful." He cooked terrible eggs. He read the newspaper out loud at breakfast. He kept the radio on the country station even though he did not actually like country. In the 2 years she lived with him, he taught her to strip a wire without nicking the copper, to wrap a junction the way a foreman would check it, and to test a circuit before she put her hand anywhere near a live one. He bought her a notebook and made her sketch out diagrams until she could read a wiring schematic as fluently as a school newspaper. "If you can fix one thing in a house," he told her, "you can stop being afraid of the house." The flashlight had been his. It was older than she was, with a brass switch and a beam that cut clean through a basement at 20 feet. The week before he died, he had pressed it into her hand with both of his. "This thing has gotten me through 40 winters in tunnels you would not believe," he said. His voice was thin from the medication. "A flashlight is the only thing you need to find what people threw away." She had asked him what he meant. He had only smiled. The hospice nurse had come in then, and Walt had closed his eyes, and 2 days later he was gone, and the agency moved her into a group home before the funeral. Now, 2 years later, almost to the week, she sat in the back booth of an all-night laundromat on a corner of Carver Street, with 2 trash bags at her feet and that same flashlight zipped into the inside pocket of her jacket where nobody could grab it. The laundromat was called Suds and Soak. The fluorescent lights buzzed. 3 of the washers were running, and nobody was watching them. The owner sat on a stool behind the change counter with a paperback open in her lap, her eyes lifting every few minutes to check the floor, and then dropping back down. Her name was Vera. Mara had not yet asked. She had read it off a paper sign scotch-taped to the change machine. Above the sign, in a careful older hand, someone had written, "If the machine eats your quarter, ask Vera. Vera will fix it." The first night, Mara had bought a single load of laundry just so she could sit in the warm air and pretend she was a person doing a chore. She had washed the contents of one trash bag, dried them, refolded everything, and stayed until 2 in the morning, until her eyelids hurt. The second night, she had not even pretended. She had bought a small bag of corn chips from the vending machine and sat in the back booth with her head against the wall. Both nights, Vera had not said a word to her. She had not asked her to leave. She had not asked if she was all right. She had only, near closing time on the second night, walked over to wipe down the booth next to Mara's, and as she walked back to the counter, she had set a small paper cup of black coffee on Mara's table without breaking stride. On the third night, Mara came back at 10:30 with her duffel bag and her 2 trash bags. The fluorescent lights were the only thing she could think of that felt like a roof. Vera looked up from her paperback as the bell over the door dinged. She did not raise her eyebrows. She turned a page. Around midnight, Mara dozed off with her cheek against the wall. When she woke, there was a small bag of cheese crackers on the table beside her elbow, the kind shaped like fish. The booth was warm. Vera was at the counter with her back turned, deliberately turned, folding a customer's order with the focus of a woman who did not want to embarrass anyone. Mara ate the crackers slowly. They were the best thing she had eaten in a week. She thought about the shelters on the list in her bag. She thought about the rules of those places, the curfews, the searches, the conversations with strangers in narrow hallways. She thought about being a girl, alone, with 2 trash bags and $43, walking into a room of strangers at midnight. Her hand drifted into her jacket pocket and closed around the cold body of the flashlight. A flashlight is the only thing you need to find what people threw away. She straightened up. She had been carrying a memory around in the back of her head for 2 years without knowing what it was for. Walt, in the kitchen, drinking his coffee out of the chipped blue mug he refused to throw away. Telling her about a year, when he was a young man on the line, when an old tunnel branch off the Carver Street station had been sealed. There had been a derailment, nothing fatal, but they had decided the spur was not worth rebuilding. They walled it off. They poured concrete over the access plate at the platform end. The crew break room down there, he said, still had his initials carved in the desk. You ever miss it? She had asked him. Sometimes, he had said. It was quiet. The trains went past on the main line and you couldn't even feel them. It was the only place in this city where I could hear myself think. She had not thought about the conversation in months. Now it sat in her head like a key in a lock. She looked across the laundromat. Vera was watching her in the reflection of the back window without quite looking at her. Vera, Mara said. The older woman turned. Her face was a careful neutral, the face of someone who had decided years ago not to scare anyone away. Honey, Vera said, is there an alley back there? Vera studied her for a moment. Then she nodded slowly. Out that door past the bathrooms. Dumpster on the left. You're not going to leave your bags, are you? No, ma'am. Vera looked at her another second. Door locks when it closes. Knock twice if you need back in. Thank you. You're never lost, Vera said in the same flat tone she used about the weather. If somebody's still looking for you. Mara did not trust herself to answer. She picked up her bags. She walked through the door past the bathrooms. The alley smelled like wet cardboard and bleach. The dumpster was on the left, exactly where Vera had said. Behind it, set into the cracked concrete of the rear wall, was a steel hatch about 3 feet square. It was painted the same gray as the wall, and at some point in the last 15 years, somebody had layered a sheet of plywood over it. The plywood was loose. The padlock that should have been securing the hatch was hanging from a corroded chain by a single broken link. A galvanized pin held the new hasp shut. 2 fingers could lift it. Mara set her bags down. She lifted the pin. Some doors aren't locked, she thought. They are just waiting for the right person to push. The hatch swung open on a hinge that screamed once and then went quiet. Below it, a vertical shaft dropped into a dark she could not see the bottom of. The smell that came up was the smell Walt's flannel shirts had carried for 40 years. Cold iron, old dust, the faint metallic tang of a rail no train had touched in a long time. Mara pulled the flashlight from her jacket and clicked it on. The beam was strong and steady and fell straight down a ladder bolted to the concrete wall. She counted the rungs by the size of the beam's circle on each one. 40 feet, maybe a little more. At the bottom, a concrete floor. Beyond the floor, the black mouth of a tunnel. She thought about turning back. She thought about Vera, who would not say anything if she came back inside. She lowered her bags down on the strap of her duffel, looping the bag's handles over a pipe at the lip of the shaft and easing them down hand over hand until the line went slack. She tucked the flashlight into her teeth. She swung her boots onto the top rung. The ladder shuddered under her, then steadied. She climbed down. At the bottom, the air was 10 degrees colder than the alley above. The concrete platform was narrow, an old maintenance landing with a metal railing that had rusted to lace at the corners. Beyond it, the tunnel ran east into a dark her flashlight could not punch all the way through. Above her, the hatch was a small bright square the size of a postage stamp. She had never been alone in this much quiet in her life. She lifted her bags onto her shoulder and started walking. The tunnel was wider than she expected. A single set of rails curved away into the dark, the steel dulled to gunmetal but unbroken. Every 20 feet, an old work lamp was bolted to the wall, the bulbs long dead, the wiring spliced and respliced by hands she would never know. Walt's hands had probably been on these. He had worked this line in '73. 100 yards in, her flashlight beam found a doorway cut into the tunnel's left wall. It was an alcove the size of a small closet, with a heavy steel door propped half open by a wooden wedge that had cracked and sagged where it sat. The door said, in stenciled white letters, most of the way faded, "Crew." She pushed it open. The crew break room was bigger than the doorway suggested. Concrete floor, concrete walls, a low concrete ceiling she could almost touch if she stood on her toes. A long enamel-topped table ran down the center, its legs bolted to the floor. 3 benches, 2 metal lockers against the back wall. A small enamel stove with a cast-iron griddle still resting on its left burner. A wash sink with a single brass tap. Pinned to the wall above the sink was a paper calendar. The page was October. The year, faded but legible, was 1973. A red pen had drawn a small star around the 14th. On the table sat a ceramic coffee mug with a faded red ring painted around its rim. Inside the mug, the dried brown remainder of a cup of coffee somebody had set down and not come back to. Next to the mug, a folded newspaper, the headline so blurred by dust she could not read it. A pencil. A pair of work gloves laid one on top of the other, palms up. The leather cracked. Mara stood in the doorway and did not move for a long minute. The room was not abandoned. The room was paused. She walked to the lockers. The first one was empty, the door hanging crooked from a single hinge. The second one was closed. Written across the door in white shoe polish, in a careful hand, were 2 words. D. Rays. She touched the letters with the tip of her finger. The shoe polish was hard, but it had not chipped away. Somebody had wanted that name to stay. She set her bags down on the bench. She put her hand flat on the enamel table and felt the cold of 50 years come up through her palm. She thought for a moment that she could feel a sound through the concrete, a vibration the way you feel a train coming before you hear it. It was only her own pulse, slowed by the cold and amplified by the silence. She turned in a slow circle, the flashlight beam sweeping the room. The sink, the stove, the lockers, the calendar. The beam swung past the back wall and caught something she had not seen yet. At the far end of the room, behind the second locker and tucked into a shallow recess in the concrete, stood a second door. It was steel like the first. It was painted the same dull gray. Across it, in stenciled letters that were sharper than the calendar, the sharper paint of a door that had been used more recently than the room around it, were the words "Authorized personnel only." The door was not flush with the wall. Somebody a long time ago had been hiding something behind it. Mara stepped closer. Her flashlight beam steadied on the seam. She did not open it that night. Walt's voice came up out of the part of her head that was always Walt now. "Settle in before you go looking," he had told her once. The first week she lived with him, when she had wanted to tear into the basement and rewire everything before she even knew where the bathroom was. You don't poke around in a building until you can sleep in it. Otherwise you make a mess, and then you have nowhere to lie down. She stepped back from the steel door. She looked at the room around her, at the calendar, and the mug in the locker with somebody's careful name written on it. Then she picked up her bags and carried them to the bench under the dead work lamp by the door, and she set up camp. The first night she slept in her coat with both bags as a pillow and the flashlight clutched in one hand. She did not turn it off until she absolutely had to. When she woke, the dark was so complete she could not tell where her hand ended and the air began. She lay very still. She listened. The tunnel did not creak. The tunnel did not breathe. The only sound was her own heartbeat, slow as a clock she had wound and forgotten about. She climbed the ladder up at first light, knocked twice on the back door of the laundromat, and Vera let her in without a word. The next 4 days, she did what Walt would have done. She made the place habitable. She started with the electric. The old work-light bus running along the tunnel wall had been killed at the platform end, but the splice junctions were intact and the conduit was dry. Mara stripped a wire, found a hot leg on a service circuit Walt had probably installed himself, and ran a single jumper into the break room. She wired one of the old socket boxes back onto the line, screwed in a 40-watt bulb she paid $2 for at a hardware store on the corner, and pulled the chain. The break room came on under the small yellow circle of that bulb like a room that had been holding its breath. She scrubbed the floor on her hands and knees with a gallon of off-brand bleach Vera had quietly set by the back door. She washed the table with a rag soaked in vinegar. She emptied the dried coffee from the mug, rinsed it 3 times under the brass tap, and set it back where she had found it. She did not move the gloves on the table. She did not touch the calendar. Whoever had walked out of this room in October of '73 had left a story behind, and Mara had decided without thinking about it that she was not going to write over it. She was going to live around it. A dumpster 2 blocks west of the laundromat coughed up a mattress that was only stained on one side. She wrestled it down the alley after midnight in 2 pieces and dragged the pieces down the ladder, one at a time. She laid them on a pallet she had built from broken-up shipping crates. She covered the mattress with a sheet Vera had set out one morning folded, no note attached. By the end of the week, the room had a bed, a working light, a stove she did not yet trust enough to use, and a duffel bag standing upright in the corner with everything she owned inside it. She slept the first full night under the bulb at the end of that week. When she woke, she did not know where she was for a long moment. The ceiling was concrete. The air was cold. She remembered. She smiled, very slightly into the dark. Vera, for her part, had stopped pretending not to notice. On the second morning, the thermos appeared by the back door. It was a battered green Stanley with the paint chipped off the cap. Inside was black coffee, hot, with 2 sugars Mara had not asked for. Beside it sat a brown paper bag with a peanut butter sandwich and a banana. Mara stood in the alley for a long minute holding the thermos in both hands. She brought the thermos back at the end of the day, washed and dried. She left it in the same spot. The next morning, it was full again. On the 5th morning, Vera was leaning in the back doorway in her cardigan, smoking the 1 cigarette she allowed herself a day. "You're sleeping down there, aren't you?" Vera said. Mara stopped with her hand on the alley gate. "Yes, ma'am." "Is it dry?" "Mostly." "You got somebody knows you're alive." Mara hesitated. "You do." Vera took a slow drag. The smoke rose into the cold air and disappeared. "All right," she said. "Then somebody knows." It was the most either of them had ever said to each other in one stretch. Vera turned to go back inside. At the door she paused. "Tap is good water up here," she said. "Come up and fill jugs whenever. There's a key on a string under the second dryer if you ever come in after I'm asleep." "Vera, why are you doing this?" Vera looked at her for a moment over her shoulder. Her eyes were tired, and had been for a long time, and she had stopped fighting it. "I had a boy your age once," Vera said. "Wherever he is now, I hope somebody's leaving a thermos out." She went inside. The door clicked shut behind her. Mara stood in the alley with the thermos in her hand, and did not move until her breath had gone from a cloud to nothing and back to a cloud again. The dog came 2 nights later. She heard him before she saw him, a small sound that was not crying exactly, more like a steady whine pressed thin against the cold. She traced the sound to the gap behind the dumpster and found a gray scrap of fur shivering against the brick. He was the size of a loaf of bread. One ear hung in 2 pieces where something had torn it. His eyes were bright and wet, and they fixed on her face and did not look away. She crouched. She held out the back of her hand. He sniffed it. He did not run. "You can't come down there with me," she told him. He sat. He kept watching her. "There's nothing for you down there." He blinked once. She picked him up. He weighed almost nothing. She named him on the ladder halfway down when he was tucked inside her jacket with only his nose sticking out and his small heart hammering against her ribs. She named him Atlas because he was a tiny animal carrying a world-sized seriousness in his eyes, and because Walt had told her once that a name was the first thing you owed a creature you had decided to keep. She set him on the mattress with a folded shirt for a bed. He took one slow look around the break room, walked a small circle, lay down on the shirt, and closed his eyes. He was already snoring when she climbed back up the ladder for a bowl of water. Atlas adjusted to the tunnel faster than she did. He learned the platform, the railing, the alcove door. He learned which bench was hers. He learned that if he scratched at the alley hatch in the morning, she would carry him up, and he would walk himself the half-block around the corner to do his business in the patch of dirt behind the laundromat. And Vera would slip him half a hot dog through the gap in the back door without saying anything to either of them. In the evenings, he slept on Mara's chest while she sat on the bench and read by the light of the 40-watt bulb. She had brought down 3 paperbacks from a free box outside a thrift store. None of them were any good. She read them anyway. Every morning when she went out to fill the water jugs, Atlas stayed in the break room. And every morning when she came back, he was not on the mattress. He was at the back of the room, sitting in front of the second steel door, his nose almost touching the floor where the door met the concrete. He never barked, he never scratched, he just sat. On the 4th morning, Mara stood behind him in the doorway with the water jugs in her hands and watched him watch the door. "What's behind it, friend?" she said. Atlas did not turn his head. She set the jugs down. She walked over to him and crouched. He pressed his shoulder against her thigh without taking his eyes off the seam. "All right," she said. She went to the corner where she had stacked her tools, Walt's flashlight, a pry bar she had paid $4 for at the hardware store, a hammer somebody had thrown out with a cracked handle that still worked fine, a pair of work gloves of her own. She came back to the door. She put her ear to it. Nothing. She tested the handle. It turned freely. The bolt was withdrawn. Somebody had left this door unlocked the last time they walked through it. She set the tip of the pry bar against the jamb anyway, just to see how the door sat. It moved a 1/4 inch outward. It was warped from 50 years of damp swollen against its frame, but the lock was open. Whoever had walked out had not locked up behind them. She put her shoulder against it. She pushed. The door scraped a slow arc across the concrete floor. The room behind it was smaller than the break room, and the air inside it was different. It was a dry air, the air of a space that had been sealed against the dampness of the tunnel by good masonry and a good door. The smell was paper, old paper, and the faint sweetness of a tea bag that had dried in its mug a long time ago. Mara stood very still on the threshold. A wooden desk faced the door. It was a heavy old thing, oak with brass-handled drawers and a green felt blotter scarred in 2 places by cigarette burns. On the desk sat a black typewriter, a Smith Corona of the model Walt had owned, with a sheet of paper still curling out of the platen. Next to the typewriter sat a white ceramic mug with the crusted brown shape of an old tea bag still inside it. Behind the desk, 3 steel file cabinets stood against the back wall, 4 drawers each, the drawers labeled in masking tape strips. Above the cabinets, somebody had taped a city map. Red pins marked a dozen addresses along Carver Street and the blocks immediately to the north. On the desk, on a wooden block, sat a small brass nameplate, Dello Rise, Community Legal ID. Mara stepped into the room. Atlas followed her without making a sound. She walked around the desk. The chair was a battered swivel with the stuffing showing through the seat. On the floor beside the chair sat a black leather handbag. The strap looped over the chair's arm, as if the woman who owned it had stood up to walk to the door and never sat back down. Inside the handbag, when Mara crouched to look, was a wallet, a small pack of tissues, a tube of lipstick, and a half-finished crossword from a newspaper dated November the 1st, 1973. On the wall above the file cabinets, set into a simple wooden frame, was a photograph. It showed a young black woman in horn-rimmed glasses, maybe 30, standing on a stoop with her hand on the elbow of a thin black man in a tweed jacket. The man's other arm held a stack of folders against his chest. Both of them were laughing at whoever was holding the camera. Behind them, the sign over a storefront read, "Rise in Torah, Legal-eyed. Walk-ins welcome." Mara looked at the woman in the photograph. She looked at the nameplate. She looked at the handbag on the chair. "Hello, Della," she said quietly. Atlas, beside her, lay down on the concrete with his chin on his paws. She went to the file cabinets. She read the masking tape labels: intake, case notes, correspondence, property, press evidence, photos. The drawers were lined up in a careful logic, the logic of a woman who had loved her job. Mara pulled out the top drawer of the cabinet labeled evidence. Inside, packed tightly, the cardboard pressed soft by 50 years of dryness, were rows of manila folders. The tabs were typed in the same neat font. Each one carried a family name and an address. Parker, 412 Curver, Whitaker, 418 Curver. Espinoza, 422 Curver. Rousseau, 422 Curver. Rousseau, 428 Curver. She slid the first folder out and laid it open on the desk. The top sheet was a typed cover memo. The header was the same as the storefront sign. Rise and Taver, Legal-eyed. The date at the upper right was October the 29th, 1973. The subject line was set in capitals, underlined twice. with a single word inside the underline: Holloway eviction and fraud. Preliminary evidence. Below the subject line, in the same neat type, was a list of 47 names. Mara set her flashlight down on the desk so the beam threw a steady circle across the page. She put one finger on the first name. She read them all the way to the bottom of the list. Then she read them again. Atlas lifted his head and looked at her. She sat down in Della Reyes's chair. The chair sighed under her. The leather of the seat had outlasted everyone who had ever used it. She did not know yet what any of it meant. She did not know who Holloway was. She did not know what the word eviction on the top of that page had cost the 47 names underneath it. She did not know that she had just walked into the middle of a story that had been waiting 50 years for somebody to walk in. But she had grown up moving from house to house with a trash bag in her hand. She knew exactly what it cost to lose an address. She turned the page. She read all night. The 47 folders were not organized alphabetically. They were organized chronologically by the date each family had been served their first notice. The earliest was June of 72. The latest was October the 3rd, 73. Each folder followed the same pattern: a typed cover memo, a photocopy of the eviction notice, a photocopy of the deed, a handwritten interview transcript, the family's account of what had happened to them. And finally, where Della had been able to find it, the bank record showing the compensation check the city said it had paid, and the bank record showing the actual deposit, which was always a smaller number, sometimes by half, sometimes by more. The deed pages were the worst part. Mara was not a lawyer. She knew nothing about real estate. But she had lived in 9 houses by the time she was 16, and she could tell when a piece of paper was lying. The notary stamps on the eviction notices were the same notary stamp over and over in a neat black circle that read Pelpice. 2 of them fell on Christmas. One of them was dated 3 weeks before the family had even gotten the notice in the mail. Della had circled the impossible dates in red pen. In the margin, in her neat schoolteacher's hand, Della had written the words M. Phelps, deceased, August of 71. The signature on the notices was the signature of a dead man. Mara worked her way through 12 folders, and then she had to stop because her eyes had gone hot. She closed the folder she was on. She rested her hand flat on the desk. Atlas lifted his head from where he was lying on her left boot and pushed his nose against her knee. They threw 47 families out of their houses with a dead man's signature, she said to him. Atlas did not have an answer. She turned off the desk lamp she had wired in from the work bus and let the room go dark for a minute. Above her somewhere, 50 feet up and half a block over, the city was making its early morning noises. A garbage truck, a bus break, a man yelling at somebody from the corner of a curb. She could not hear any of it. She could only feel it in her bones, the same as the cold under her boots, without sound. She turned the lamp back on. She kept reading. The folder labeled Press was thinner than the others. 2 newspaper clippings. The first was a small piece from a paper called the Carver Street Sentinel, dated September of 73, headlined "Local Lawyer Questions City Evictions." The body of the piece quoted Della and a man named James Tovar of Reyes and Tovar Legal Aid, who said they had identified, quote, a pattern of irregularities in the documentation surrounding the displacement of working families along Carver Street. Tovar was quoted as saying the firm intended to forward its findings to the state attorney general by the end of the year. The second clipping was bigger, and the paper was a city daily. The date was November the 17th, 17 days after the date on the unfinished crossword in Della's handbag. Hit and run kills legal aid attorney. James Tovar, 41, partner in the Reyes and Tovar legal aid practice on Carver Street, had been struck and killed by a vehicle in the parking lot behind the firm's offices at approximately even in the evening of November the 16th. There were no witnesses. The vehicle had not been recovered. Police were continuing to investigate. Below the clipping, paper clipped to the back, was a single page of typed notes in Della's hand. The first line read, Phelps signed those notices 6 months after he was buried. Whoever paid Phelps's widow to look the other way also paid the driver. They will come for me next. I am taking the files to the Spur. There were no more pages after that. Mara closed the folder. She sat very still for a long minute. Then she stood, walked to the photograph on the wall above the cabinets, and looked at the thin black man in the tweed jacket, who had been laughing at the camera with his arm around Della's elbow. I am very sorry, Mr. Tovar, she said. She turned out the lamp. She climbed the ladder above ground. The sun was up. She had not slept in 2 days. She did not feel tired. She felt like a person handed a load they had not asked for, not yet certain whether to set it down or pick it up. She walked past Vera with a nod. Vera looked at her face once, said nothing, and pushed a thermos and a sandwich across the counter as Mara went by. The Central Library was 8 blocks south. Mara had been there twice as a kid, both times on a school field trip. The reading room was 3 stories tall with brass railings and a domed ceiling someone had painted blue 100 years ago. She washed her face in the second-floor bathroom. She tied her hair back. She looked at herself in the mirror and decided that for the next hour she was going to be a college student doing research. And if anybody asked her what college, she was going to say the community college, which was true enough that she would not have to lie. The reference desk was at the back of the main reading room. Behind it sat a Korean-American man in his late 40s, in a soft gray cardigan and wire-frame glasses, reading a thick book with a pencil in his hand. The nameplate on the desk said Henry Park, Reference. He looked up when she approached. His eyes did not flick down to her boots or her jacket. They stayed on her face. "Good morning," he said. His voice was soft. "What can I help you find?" "I'm trying to find a person," Mara said. "An older woman. She would be in her late 80s. She used to be a lawyer in the city in the early 70s. Her name is Della Reyes." He set his pencil down very carefully. He looked at her for another second, and then he turned to his computer. "Reyes is a common name," he said. "Do you have anything else?" She had a partner, James Tovar. He was killed in 1973. Henry's hands paused on the keyboard. He looked back at her over the tops of his glasses. The look was not surprise. It was the careful, neutral Vera had perfected. "You have come to the right desk," he said. He typed for 2 minutes. He pulled 3 different databases up on his screen. He printed out a sheet of paper and a second sheet and a third. He handed them to her across the desk without making a production of any of it. "Della Reyes, 88, currently a resident of a city-skilled nursing facility on the north side," he said. "I have written the address on the bottom of the second page. She has been there for 4 years. She is listed as still mentally competent." Mara took the papers in both hands. "Thank you. There is also a folder in our local history collection on the Reyes and Tovar firm," Henry said. "It was donated by a community organization in the 90s. I can pull it for you if you would like." He came around the desk. He paused at the corner of it, his hand resting on the wood, and he looked at her for what felt like a long time. "You will forgive an old librarian's curiosity," he said. "May I ask what you are working on?" Mara opened her mouth and closed it again. She had not prepared a story. "I think," she said slowly, "I am working on something Della Reyes did not get to finish." Henry's face did not change, but the look behind his eyes did. "I used to write for the city paper before this," he said. "I covered cases like the one I think you are not quite telling me about. I am not going to ask you anything else right now, but I am going to give you my card, and if at any point you decide somebody outside the library should know what you are doing, I would consider it a personal favor if you called me first." He took a small white card out of his wallet and set it on top of her papers. Henry Park, Reference Librarian. Below it, a phone number in pencil he had added himself. "The people the world forgets," Henry said very quietly, "are usually the ones holding it together." Mara nodded once. She did not trust her voice. He went to pull the folder. While he was gone, she sat at one of the long wooden tables and watched the morning sun come through the dome. Her hands were shaking slightly. She put them under the table. Henry brought the folder. It was thin. 2 photographs of Reyes and Tovar standing in front of the storefront. A copy of an obituary for James Tovar that said almost nothing she did not already know. A typed letter from a community organization that had tried in 1991 to fund a memorial scholarship in James Tovar's name and had been quietly told by someone at City Hall that the firm was, quote, "not the right legacy for that money." Mara made photocopies. She paid for them out of her remaining cash. As she walked toward the front of the library to leave, she passed the community bulletin board near the exit and stopped. Pinned in the center of the board was a glossy half-sheet flyer in city blue. Public hearing prose. Carver Stret. Redevelopment. Sponsored by Councilman Ben Halloway. Wednesday the 15th at 7 p.m. City Council Chambers. Underneath, in smaller type, a list of the proposed changes. New mixed-use development. Pedestrian plaza. permanent sealing of the abandoned Carver Spur subway tunnel for public safety, demolition and reconstruction beginning within 30 days of vote. Mara stood in front of the bulletin board for a long minute. 3 weeks. She had 3 weeks before the door of every room she had begun to think of as hers was poured shut with concrete. The councilman's name on the flyer was the same name on the dead notary's eviction notices in Della's files. If you've made it this far into Mara's story, hit subscribe because what comes next is the part I have been waiting to tell you. She took the flyer off the board. She folded it in half. She put it in her jacket pocket with Henry Park's card. She walked back to the laundromat. Vera looked up from her stool, looked at her face, did not say a word, and handed her a hot dog wrapped in a napkin. "I have to take a bus," Mara said. "Where?" "North Side, the nursing home." Vera reached under the counter and pulled out a worn vinyl change purse. She counted out $4 in quarters, slid them across the counter, and pushed the purse back. "You bring back the change," she said, "but I do not want to see you walking." Mara nodded. She did not trust her voice. She took the quarters. Atlas she left in the back booth with a folded towel for a bed and the broken end of her sandwich. He watched her go without complaint. He was a small dog. He knew how to wait. The bus to the north side took 45 minutes. Mara sat by the window with the folded flyer and the photocopied obituary in her lap and the photograph in her jacket pocket. She had taken the smaller of the two photographs from Della's office, the one Della had probably never expected anybody to find. It showed Della and James, and a third person Mara did not recognize, standing in front of a brick row house, holding up a hand-painted sign that read, "W will be back." The nursing home was a low brick building set back from the road behind a row of plane trees. The lobby smelled like floor wax and lavender powder. The receptionist was a woman in scrubs who looked up at Mara, took in her jacket and her boots, and the bag at her hip, and arranged her face into a careful kindness. "I'm here to see Della Reyes," Mara said. The receptionist hesitated. "Are you family?" Mara did not look away. "I am bringing her something she has been waiting for." The receptionist studied her face for what felt like a long time. Then she did something Mara had not expected. She picked up the phone, called the room, and said only, "Ms. Reyes, there is a young woman here who says she has something you have been waiting for. May I send her down?" The receptionist listened for a second. Her eyebrows went up very slightly. She set the phone back in its cradle. "Room 23, she said. "End of the hall on the right. Take your time." The hall was long and yellow lit. The doors on either side were half open. Some of the rooms had voices in them, low voices, televisions. Some of the rooms were quiet. Room 23 was at the end on the right, as the receptionist had said. The door was open. Inside, a small woman sat by the window in a wheelchair. Her hair was white, and her hands were folded in her lap. She turned her head when Mara stepped into the doorway, and the morning light hit her glasses, and for a second Mara could not see her eyes. Then Della Reyes leaned forward, half an inch, and looked at her. "Come in, child," she said. Her voice was thin and clear and perfectly steady. "Close the door behind you." Mara stepped inside. She closed the door. She walked to the chair beside the window and she did not sit down. She took the photograph out of her jacket pocket. She held it out, face up, on the flat of her palm. Della looked at the photograph. She did not reach for it. Her hand rose slowly and pressed against her mouth. The fingers were thin and the skin was paper pale and they trembled. "Oh," she said into her hand. Mara waited. Della lowered her hand. Her eyes had filled. Behind the glasses they were sharp and dark and they did not look away. "You found my office," Della said. "Yes, ma'am." "Oh, child." Della's voice cracked, and she shook her head once, and she put her hand back over her mouth. "You found my office." Mara waited. After a long minute, Della reached out and took the photograph from Mara's palm. She held it in both hands, very gently, the way you hold something you have not been allowed to touch in a long time. She looked at the face of the man in the tweed jacket. "James," she said. Then she set the photograph in her lap and looked up at Mara, and the sharpness in her eyes was the sharpness of a woman who had spent 50 years preparing for a conversation she did not expect to have. "Sit down," Della said. "Sit down and tell me your name." "Mara Quinn, ma'am." "Mara Quinn." Della rolled the name across her tongue like a coin she was checking the weight of. "How old are you, Mara Quinn?" 18, ma'am." "And how did you find my office?" "I had nowhere to sleep," Mara said. Della watched her for a long moment, and then she gave one small nod. A question that had been bothering her for a long time had just been answered. All right, she said. You are going to want to know everything before you decide what to do with it. Are you in a hurry? No, ma'am. Good. Pull that chair closer. There is a pitcher of water on the side table. Pour us each a cup. Della began at the beginning. Her parents had moved up from a small town in Mississippi in 1941. Her father had worked the rail yards. Her mother had taught second grade. Della had gone to a city law school on a scholarship and had passed the bar at 24. She had opened the storefront on Carver Street with James Tovar, whom she had married in 1969 in a small ceremony in her mother's kitchen. We did not do divorces, she said. We did not do criminal. We did landlord-tenant. We did benefits. We did people who walked in the door with a piece of paper they did not understand, and we sat with them at that desk and we read it together. We were not getting rich. We were getting somewhere. The Holloway eviction notices had started arriving in their office in the spring of '72. At first it was 1 a week. Then it was 3. Then 5. The families all lived along the same stretch of Carver Street. The notices all carried the same notary stamp. The names on the deeds were getting transferred to one of 3 shell companies, all of which traced back through enough corporate paperwork to fill a drawer to a single man on the city planning commission named Frederick Holloway. James was the one who pulled the death certificate on Phelps, Della said. Phelps had been the notary on those notices for almost a year by then. James went to the Office of Vital Records and he came back with the certificate and he set it on my desk. And he said, Della, we are looking at a fraud the size of a city block. She paused. Her hand drifted to the photograph in her lap. We had a foreman on the line who owed James a favor, she said. James had kept his oldest boy out of a charge that would have followed him for life. The foreman knew about the spur. He had been part of the crew that walled it off in '73. He gave me his key set. He never asked me why. On November the 16th, James went to the office at the end of the day to lock up. I had gone home to put a roast in. He never came back. The car that hit him had no plates. The police closed the file in 2 weeks. She looked up at Mara. Her eyes were dry now. I packed 2 suitcases and a typewriter, she said. I went down the ladder. I set up the office in the bunker. I worked from there for 19 days. I came out one morning and there was a man sitting in a car at the end of the alley. He was not pretending to read a newspaper. He wanted me to see him. I went back down. I locked the door. I left the files. I climbed out a different exit, James, and I had mapped a year before, on the far end of the spur, behind a maintenance shed, 2 blocks east. I left town that afternoon. I came back 2 years later under my married name and I did not speak of any of it to anyone for 50 years. She drew a breath. I had a son. I had a grandson. I had a quiet life. I told myself every November the 16th that I was going to drive across town and go down that ladder one more time. And every November the 16th I did not. Why? Mara said very gently. Della looked at her for a long time. Because I had been a brave woman once, she said, and being brave had cost me my husband, and I had decided I would rather be a coward who got to watch her son grow up. I am sorry, Mara Quinn. I am sorry I made you walk through that door first. Mara reached across and put her hand on top of Della's. Della's hand was thin and warm, and she turned it over and held Mara's back. Ma'am, Mara said, you walked through it first. You just got chased back out. I am only finishing the job. Della closed her eyes for a long second. When she opened them, she was a lawyer again. There is something else in that room, she said. Behind the bottom file cabinet, the one labeled property, there is a panel cut into the back of the wall. The seam is hidden by the cabinet's frame. You will need to pull the cabinet out. Behind the panel, there is a small steel box. The combination is the day my husband and I were married. June 14th, '69. 6/14, 6/9. Mara wrote it on the inside of her palm with a ballpoint pen Della handed her. Inside the box, Della said, are 7 property deeds. I bought back 7 of the houses Holloway was clearing in '72 with the last of my father's inheritance. I put them in the name of my cousin Beatrice, who is also dead now. Beatrice never knew. I held them in trust. Holloway thought he had cleared the block. He did not clear the block. He cleared half of the block, and I held the other half against him with the only weapon I had, which was a quiet woman with a checkbook. Ma'am, they are still mine, or they are still nobody's, depending on which lawyer you ask. They have not been claimed in 50 years. I want you to put them in the hands of a person who will know what to do with them. She fished in a drawer of her bedside table and brought out a small pad of nursing home stationery and a pen. She wrote a name and a phone number in a hand that shook only at the very end of the loops. She tore the page off. She held it out. "This is my grandson," she said, "Marcus Reyes. He is an architect. He has spent the last 10 years trying to write the history of this firm without my help. I have not been kind to him about it. Call him. Tell him his grandmother says it is time." Mara folded the slip of paper carefully and put it in the inside pocket of her jacket beside Henry Park's card. "Yes, ma'am." And Mara. "Yes, ma'am. Do not come up that ladder alone after dark for the next 2 weeks. If you must be down there at night, take the dog with you." Mara did not ask how Della knew about Atlas. She went back through the long yellow hall and out through the lobby, past the receptionist, who watched her go with a face that had softened around the eyes. She took the bus back to the laundromat. Vera was at the counter. Mara did not say anything. She set the change purse on the counter with $2 in quarters returned. Vera nodded once and put the purse back under. "Phone in the back office," Vera said. "Local calls free." "It is local." "Then make it." The back office was a closet behind the counter with a desk, a calendar, a metal filing cabinet, and a beige phone Mara guessed was older than she was. She dialed the number on the nursing home stationery. A man answered on the second ring. "Marcus Reyes. My name is Mara Quinn. Your grandmother asked me to call you. She said to tell you it is time." There was a long silence on the line. "Where are you?" Marcus said finally. "A laundromat on Carver Street. Suds and soak. I'll be there in 40 minutes. She set the phone in its cradle. She sat in the metal chair for a minute with her hands flat on the desk. Then she got up and went down the ladder with Atlas tucked under her arm, and she pulled the bottom file cabinet labeled Property away from the wall. The seam was where Della had said it was, a square cut into the concrete and faced over with a panel of plaster that had been painted to match. Mara worked the edge with her pry bar. The panel came out in one neat piece, the size of a hardcover book. Behind it sat a small steel box with a 4-tumbler combination lock. She spun the dials. 614, 6-9, the lock clicked. Inside, neatly stacked, were 7 deeds on heavy cream paper. The names on the deeds were the addresses she had been reading all night. 412 Carver, 418, 422, 428, 430, 440, 446. The grantee on every one of them was a woman named Beatrice Reyes Walters. Underneath the deeds, paper clipped to a card with Della's handwriting on it, was a single key. The card read, "For the safe at the back of the bunker, behind the second locker. Insurance." Mara did not look for the second safe yet. She closed the box. She wrapped the deeds in a clean dish towel. She climbed back up the ladder. She handed the bundle to Vera across the counter. "In your office safe," she said. "Please. I will explain when I can." Vera looked at the bundle. She looked at Mara. She took the bundle into the back, and Mara heard the heavy metal click of a safe door. The bell over the door dinged. The man who walked in was in his mid-30s, in a dark coat over a knit sweater, with close-cropped hair and a face Mara recognized from the third person in the photograph at Della's office. The unrecognized person, 50 years older and 1 generation removed. He had his grandfather's tweed jacket folded over his arm. "Mara Quinn," he said. "Marcus Reyes." Vera came out from the back. She put her hands flat on the counter. She looked Marcus up and down with the slow, careful look she gave every man who had ever come into her laundromat asking for a girl. Marcus did not look away. He let her look. After 10 seconds, Vera reached for the coffee pot. "Sit," Vera said. "Both of you. Sit down before you fall down." They sat in the back booth. Vera brought them both coffee. Mara reached into her bag and brought out a single folder, the topmost one from Della's press drawer. She slid it across the table. Marcus opened it. He read the clipping about his grandfather. He turned to the typed note in Della's hand. He read it twice. He set his hands flat on the table on either side of the folder, his fingers spread, and he sat very still for a long time. "She did this," he said finally, "by herself, while she was being hunted. Yes," Mara said, "and she has been carrying this alone. My entire life." "Yes." Marcus put his face in his hands for a long moment. When he lowered them, his eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. "Tell me where she is," he said. "I am going to drive there tonight. And then tomorrow you and I and whoever else needs to be in this conversation are going to sit down and figure out what to do," she told him. The showing at Henry Park's apartment happened 2 evenings later. Henry lived in a small one-bedroom on the third floor of an old walk-up on the west side. The walls were lined with books. He had cleared the dining table. The legal aid attorney he had brought was a young woman named Rosa in her early 30s, with a quiet manner and a worn brown briefcase. She listened. She did not interrupt. She read every folder Mara had carried up from the bunker in a backpack. When she was done, she closed the last folder and folded her hands on top of it. "This is a case," she said. "It is a hard case. It will take years, but it is a case, and the deeds are the thing. The deeds change the math entirely." Marcus drove Mara back to the laundromat at midnight. He stood in the alley with her for a long minute before she went around to the back door. "You are not alone in this anymore," he said. "I know. My grandmother says the same thing," she told me. On the phone tonight, she said, "Marcus, she is not alone in this anymore. Tell her thank you." "I will." He waited until she had knocked twice on Vera's back door and gone inside before he got into his car. Below in the bunker, she fed Atlas his evening half of a hot dog and curled up on the mattress with him against her ribs. She did not hear what woke him. She felt it through her shoulder, a low hum in his throat that he did not let escape into a bark. His head was up. His eyes were fixed on the doorway to the break room. She held very still. The break room was dark beyond the open doorway. Her bulb was the only light in the bunker. She could hear nothing. She slid off the mattress and reached for the flashlight on the desk. Atlas's growl deepened by a half note. She walked very softly to the doorway. She listened. After a long moment, she heard the faintest possible scrape. Far away, the sound of a boot heel on a concrete platform. Then nothing. She did not move for 10 minutes. She did not turn the flashlight on. Eventually, Atlas's growl subsided. He looked up at her. He gave one small whimper. She picked him up and carried him back to the mattress and lay down with him, pressed against her chest. She did not sleep until the gray square of the hatch above her, which she could not actually see, had become a thing she could feel pressing against the dark. She climbed up at first light. The alley was empty. The hatch was closed. The pin was in place. Vera was already on her stool. She looked at Mara's face. "You did not sleep," Vera said. "No, ma'am." Vera reached for the coffee pot. Mara went back down. She walked into the break room with her flashlight on full. The first thing she saw was the desk in the bunker through the open doorway. The middle drawer was pulled out, its contents spilled on the floor. The top folder of the evidence cabinet was open on the desk. The photographs that had been pinned to the wall had been pulled down and set in a careless stack on the chair. The steel door behind the locker was open. The lock had been broken with a pry bar from the inside. Mara walked carefully through the room. She did not touch anything yet. She checked the bottom file cabinet first. The panel behind it was still in place. Whoever had been here had not known where to look. The deeds were safe and Vera's safe one floor and one ladder above her head. She walked back to the desk in the bunker. On the green felt blotter, set carefully in the dead center of the desk, was a single sheet of paper. It was typed in a font she did not recognize. The slightly heavy weight of an old manual typewriter on a fresh ribbon. It said 2 words. Mara stood very still in the lantern light. Atlas walked into the room behind her and sat down at her feet. After a long moment, she crouched and gathered the scattered photographs into a careful stack. She slid the open folder closed. She set the spilled drawer contents back in their drawer. She took the typed note off the blotter, folded it once, and slipped it into the inside pocket of her jacket beside the slip with Marcus's number. She stood up. "No," she said quietly, to the empty room and to whoever had stood in it the night before. Atlas pressed against her leg. She started packing the bunker for what came next. For the next 10 days, the bunker became a different kind of place. Mara did not stop living in it. She kept the cot and the bulb and Atlas's folded shirt by the door. But every morning at first light she carried a small stack of folders up the ladder in her backpack, and every afternoon Marcus met her at a bank on the south side of the city where Henry had used his name to co-sign a safety deposit box big enough to hold 1,000 pages. By the end of the first week, the most damning third of Della's files had been moved out of the bunker entirely. Photocopies sat in a fireproof box at Rosa's law office. Originals sat in the bank. The remaining files in the bunker were the parts that mattered less. The second-tier corroborative paper kept down there so anybody who came looking for the box would still find a box. Marcus took to coming in through the back of the laundromat after dark. Vera did not put a sign on her door for him. She just left the back unlocked when she knew he was coming. Atlas had decided in the first 10 minutes that Marcus was acceptable, and Marcus had spent the second 10 minutes earning it by carrying down a small space heater that had been sitting unused in his garage for 2 years. Henry came once. He stood for a long time in the doorway of the bunker, his hands folded in front of him, and he looked at Della's desk and her typewriter and her handbag still draped over the chair. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. "This is the first room I have ever stood in," he said, "where the dust is somebody's biography." Bennett's daughter, the councilman's communications director, was a woman in her late 20s who had been doing her father's press releases for 6 years. Henry had asked her to lunch on the 8th day. He had not told her what about. He had brought one folder with him in a soft leather bag. He had set it across the table from her without a word. She had read it. She had not spoken for a long minute. Then she had asked Henry in a voice that had gone almost too quiet to hear, "Are there more of these?" Henry had nodded. "How many?" She had closed the folder very carefully. She had said only, "Give me 3 days." The public hearing was on a Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock in the council chambers downtown. The room had the high ceiling and the dark wood paneling of a building from a century when men with serious faces wanted to make their decisions in serious rooms. The council bench was on a raised dais at the front. A blue felt rope marked off a public gallery with 30 folding chairs. The audience was small. Most of the chairs were empty. Bennett Halloway sat at the center of the dais in a tailored gray suit. He was tall and silver-haired, and his smile and the photograph on his campaign posters had been engineered by a consultant from out of state. In person, his smile was tired around the edges and his hands rested very still on the polished wood in front of him. He nodded at constituents he recognized. He did not look at the back of the room. Mara sat in the second row from the front, on the aisle, in a clean shirt Marcus's wife had pressed for her. Her hair was pulled back. Her boots were the same boots. Her hands were folded in her lap, and they were shaking very slightly, and Marcus beside her had reached over once at the start and pressed his palm against her knuckles until they stopped. Henry sat one row back. Rosa sat next to him with a thin black binder on her lap. Behind the dais, on a screen, the developers' renderings glowed: glass and brick, a pedestrian plaza, a coffee chain logo on a corner unit, a small inset diagram of the abandoned Carver Spur subway tunnel, with a red X through it, and the words "Permanently Sailed for Public Safety" in a neat sans serif font. The chair of the planning subcommittee called the meeting to order. The developer's representative spoke for 15 minutes about traffic and tax base and community investment. A young man from the city's economic development office spoke for another 10 about the studies. Bennett spoke last on behalf of his office's sponsorship of the project. He used the phrase "long overdue." He used the phrase "responsible stewardship." He used the phrase "the future we are building for our children." He smiled the engineered smile. The chair opened the floor for public comment. For a long second, nobody moved. Mara stood up. She walked to the small wooden podium in front of the dais. The microphone was a foot too tall for her. She pulled it down. She looked at Bennett. He looked back at her with the patient, kindly expression of a man who had no idea who she was. "My name is Mara Quinn," she said. "I am 18 years old. For the last 2 months I have been living in the abandoned tunnel your project would seal up forever. I want to read you 3 names." Bennett's smile did not change, but his hand on the wood went still in a slightly different way. "Eleanor Parker," Mara said, "of 412 Carver Street. Marvin and Joyce Whitaker, of 418 Carver Street. The Espinoza family, mother, father, 2 girls, and a boy, of 422 Carver Street. In 1972 and 3, these families were evicted from their homes by the office of Frederick Halloway, working through 3 shell corporations, using a notary stamp that belonged to a man who had been dead for 14 months. They were paid less than half of what city records say they were paid. Their houses were demolished for a development that was never built. The lot is still empty. It is a parking lot for a building that closed in '96. She paused. She did not look down at any notes. She had been carrying these names in her head for a week. "I have 44 more names," she said. "If you give me 40 more seconds, I will read them too." Bennett opened his mouth. He closed it. "I am not asking you," Mara said, "to undo something your grandfather did. I am asking you not to do it again. Sealing that tunnel forever in 30 days seals a room down there with a desk and a typewriter and a file cabinet that has been holding the proof of what was done to those families for 50 years. A woman named Della Reyes hid those files. She was a lawyer. Her partner was killed for working on that case. She thought she would come back for the files when she was strong enough. She never came back. But she is here tonight. She turned and looked at the door at the back of the chamber. Marcus opened the door. He wheeled Della in. Della was in a soft white sweater, and her hair was up in a careful bun, and she had her glasses on, and she sat very small and very straight in the wheelchair. Marcus pushed her down the aisle to the podium. He stepped back. He gave her the microphone. Della did not need to pull it down. The room had gone very quiet. Della looked at Bennett Holloway for a long moment. She had never met him. She had only known his grandfather. She did not say any of that. "My name is Della Reyes," she said. Her voice was small and clear and steady. "I am 88 years old. In 1973, I was a girl with a typewriter and a list of names. That is all anyone ever is. A list of names they refuse to forget." She paused. The microphone caught her breath. "My husband was killed for that list. I went underground with it. I came back up alone. I did not finish my work because I was afraid. I have been afraid for 50 years. I am very sorry." She turned to Mara. "This child," she said, "walked into my office while I was busy being afraid. She picked up the work I had set down. She is going to finish it. The least I can do is stop being a coward in front of a microphone." She turned back to the dais. 40 years underground, she said, and somebody finally turned on the light. She let go of the microphone. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at the chairwoman of the planning subcommittee, who was a black woman in her 50s, and the chairwoman very quietly lowered her head and pressed 2 fingers against her eyes. In the silence that followed, a chair scraped at the side of the dais. Bennett's daughter stood up. She had been sitting at the small staff table to the right of the dais all evening, her laptop open in front of her, doing her job. Now she closed the laptop. She picked up a large manila envelope from the floor beside her chair. She walked across the front of the room. She climbed the 3 steps to the dais. She set the envelope, very deliberately, on the wood directly in front of her father. Then she turned around and walked back down the steps and out the side door of the chamber without looking at anyone. Bennett sat very still and stared at the envelope. He did not reach for it. He did not move. The chairwoman lifted her gavel and set it back down without striking it. "This hearing," she said, "is in recess." The vote was tabled that night. It was tabled again the following week. The week after that, Bennett Holloway resigned his counsel seat in a 1-paragraph statement that cited personal reasons and was published on a Saturday morning when no reporter would notice. The state attorney general's office opened a file the following Monday. Rosa's firm filed the first of what would eventually be 23 civil cases on behalf of the families and the heirs of the families on Della's list. The cases would take years to settle. They would never become a criminal indictment because most of the original defendants were dead, but the money would come, and it would come in real amounts, and it would come to the right hands. 3 months later, the city designated the Carver Spur a historic site. The maintenance hatch behind Vera's laundromat was issued a small bronze plaque, the size of a paperback, that said only "The Rise Bunker. Enter with respect." A council subcommittee, on the unanimous recommendation of the new council member from the district, voted to convert the bunker into a public archive of the city's community legal aid history. The 7 properties Della had held in trust were transferred, by court order, into a community land trust that would convert them over the following 2 years into deeply affordable housing for 47 family units. Marcus's small foundation hired Mara as the archive's on-site caretaker. The job came with a small studio apartment 2 floors above the laundromat, in a building Vera's landlord had been trying to fill for 18 months. The rent was paid out of the foundation's grant. Mara had a window that looked down on the alley. She had a real bed for the first time in her adult life. She had a desk under the window with a stack of community college brochures on it. She enrolled in night classes the second week. She signed up for a history class, a writing class, and a class in basic accounting that she did not enjoy, but that Vera had told her she was going to need. She brought Atlas up the ladder for the last time on a clear afternoon in early spring. He looked back at the bunker once before she carried him up. He did not look back twice. Della died peacefully 5 weeks after the hearing. Marcus called Mara from the nursing home at 6 o'clock in the morning. His voice was tired but not broken. He told her his grandmother had asked, on her last clear afternoon, for him to give Mara a message. "She wanted me to tell you," he said. "Real family is who stays." Mara stood in her small kitchen with the phone against her ear and the morning light coming through the window. and she pressed her free hand flat against the counter. "Thank you," she said. "I will tell Atlas." The Reyes bunker opened to the public on a Saturday in late spring. There was a small ribbon. The new council member spoke for 2 minutes. Henry Parks stood in the back with his hands folded. Vera came in her good cardigan and stood next to him. Rosa came with 3 of the families from the list, the Espinoza children, who were grown now, who were grandparents themselves, walked down the ladder one at a time and stood for a long minute in front of Della's desk. Mara wore a clean shirt and her boots, and she carried Atlas in her arms for the photos. She gave the tour. She did not stumble over any of the names. She knew the names. That evening, after the small crowd was gone and Vera had gone upstairs and Marcus had driven home, Mara stood at dusk in the alley behind the laundromat. The hatch had a new gate now, a small steel grill she had welded herself, one Saturday with a community college instructor watching over her shoulder. The gate had a lock. The lock had a key. The key sat on a ring on Mara's belt. 3 young people came around the corner of the alley. One was a girl about Mara's age in a thin jacket. One was a boy in his early 20s with a backpack. The third was a man maybe 40, with the careful posture of a person who has not slept indoors in a long time. They had heard from a woman at the women's shelter on the south side that there was a place on Carver Street where you could come at night if you needed to, and somebody would not ask you anything you did not want to be asked. Mara had spent the spring quietly telling that woman, and 3 or 4 other women like her, that she was opening her old room to anyone who needed the floor for a night. She did not have shelter funding. She did not have permits. She had a public archive that closed at 5 o'clock and a private apartment 2 floors up with a kitchenette and a small alcove off the archive's reading room with 2 cots and a folded stack of clean blankets. She had told the foundation about it on the 2nd week of her job. The foundation had thought about it for a day, and then they had said very carefully that they would prefer not to know the details. She unlocked the gate. "Bathroom is the 2nd door at the bottom of the ladder," she said. "There's hot water in the sink, coffee in the kitchenette, blankets on the cots. I'll be up in the apartment if you need anything. Don't try to use the typewriter. It's 100 years old." The girl in the thin jacket looked at her for a long moment. "Why are you doing this?" the girl said. Mara held the gate open. "Because somebody held a door open for me," she said. "And because a flashlight is the only thing you need to find what people threw away." Vera was in the back doorway of the laundromat with a thermos in her hand, and she lifted it a little in salute, and Atlas pressed against Mara's calf, and the 3 young people went past her one at a time and down the ladder into the warm yellow light Mara had wired into a room that used to be a hiding place and was now a doorway. She closed the gate behind them. She did not lock it. She turned and walked back toward the laundromat. Vera handed her the thermos at the door. "It's full," Vera said. She took the thermos. She climbed the stairs to her apartment. Atlas climbed with her, one careful step at a time. The window was open and the spring air was coming in. She set the thermos on the counter. She sat down at her desk. She opened a book. Below her, in the small bright room she had built out of someone else's silence, 3 people who had needed a roof tonight had one. That was the thing Walt had been trying to tell her all those years ago, in a kitchen that had not been hers and a life that had not been hers either. You take the light, you find what people threw away, and then, if you are very lucky, and the world tilts the right way once or twice, you build a place where somebody else can come in out of the cold. Outside the window the city went on with its evening. A bus brake, a street light clicking on, a small dog somewhere barking once and going quiet. Mara turned the page.